This should do the trick. Sign up form secured. What is up, everyone, and welcome to Hello World Episode 12, Sign Up Form Front-End Validation. As with every video, we're implementing a new feature in our Hello World website, so if there's something you would like to see coded up and implemented, let me know in the comments down below. Let's get into the episode. By the end of this video, over on our sign up form, which we created in our last video with HTML and CSS, now we're going to add JavaScript so we can validate each of these input fields when the user clicks sign up. If I don't fill out any of the input fields and click sign up, our error messages will display, and we will add an input class error to each of the input fields. Let's enter an invalid email and click sign up. You'll notice the error is still there along with the class. Now if I enter a valid email address and click sign up, the error message goes away and we remove the error class that we've applied to that input field as well. Same for our username field. As long as we put something in there that's 4 characters long and alphanumeric, the error message and class will disappear. First name is just checking for anything in the field. Last name is the same. And then our password. The password and confirmed password have to match and be 8 characters long. Now when we click sign up, all the errors went away, and on sign up, we're going to redirect the user to the home page. Now the user actually is not logged in right now because this is just front-end validation. In our next video, we're going to be creating a database, sending our front-end form data to the back-end, validating it, and inserting it into the database. But for this episode, we're just focused on front-end validation, validating each of these input fields, and in the next video, we'll send this data to the back-end and validate it there. Let's code. We're going to begin in our app views, sign up, HTML body. In the last video, episode 11, we set up the form UI, set up the HTML and the CSS. If you guys missed that episode, go check it out in my Hello World playlist. In this video, we're going to be adding the JavaScript front-end validation so we can show and hide error messages and validate each input field based on what the user is supposed to input in that field. Along with our HTML body, we need the JavaScript for our signup page, which is over in the Assets, JavaScript, Signup, Script.js file. We're going to begin by adding an event listener to our page. And this listener is listening for when our document is ready. Whenever all the HTML and CSS is set up, then we can access it via JavaScript inside this function. All the validation is going to happen when we click on our sign up button right here. We're going to target our button-signup class. Inside of our document.ready function, we're going to add a listener. Get element by class name, button sign up, add event listener, and we're listening for the click event. Now inside of here, we're going to place what we want to do when the user clicks on the sign up button. And we're going to create a new function called server sign up. We're going to define this function outside of our document.ready right here. And to verify this click event is working, we're going to put an alert here and then reload our page. Now when we click sign up, we should get an alert saying hello world. So we know that our click is working. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a JavaScript form helper. This will not only be able to help us on the sign up form, but we'll easily be able to add it to any other forms that we have on any future pages in the site and use it there. We're going to create a variable called sign up form, and we're going to create a new form helper object. And we will pass in an object for the parameters when we set up our form helper. Now we need to create our form helper. Over in our app assets JavaScript, we're going to create a new folder in here called form helper. And inside of our form helper folder, we're going to create a script.js file. Open that up in our text editor, and we're going to define our form helper object. We're going to create our constructor function here, which has to have the same name as the variable we defined, and we have to return it. Now, this constructor function takes in the args. It's a parameter, an object, and that args is our object coming from right over here, our new form helper, and then the object that we pass in. Now before we go any further, we want to make sure the script gets included on our site so we can actually make this call right here and set up a new form helper. Over in our views signup HTML head, the head specific for our signup page is where we're going to place the include for our script. We're going to copy the script tag here for our page specific JS and call this form helper JS. And we're going to update the path, so we're including our form helper. JavaScript folder, the folder is called form helper, and in that form helper folder is our script.js, which is right here. So let's hop over to our HTML body for our signup. Go to our very first input. Our form helper is going to look at each input on the page. So we're going to create a specific class for our form helper. We're going to call it signup-fh for form helper. Now in our form helper JavaScript, we're going to look for any input on the page that has signup-fh. If it has this class, we will know that we want to validate it with our form helper. Then we're going to add a data attribute. Call this column email. This will be the name of the column in the database. It has to be unique for each input on the page. Then we're going to add a data check. The check is going to specify what function we want the form helper to use when validating the text the user has entered in this input. We're going to specify email because it's an email address. Then we're going to specify a message, and this is going to be the error message that is going to be displayed to the user. We're going to take the error message that's currently in our input error message class div and put it inside the data attribute. The form helper is going to validate the input in this input against the email function. If it finds an error, it's going to pull the data message out of here and place it in here. And we're going to do this for each of our input fields. Copy our signup-fh and paste it here in our next input, which is our username. Copy all the other data attributes. This data column will be our username column in the database. And the check we want to do here is our username check. So we'll have a separate function for validating the email and the username in our form helper object. Then we're going to take our error message for username and place it in the data message. Do that again for our first name. Column is first_name. The check we want to do is going to be name, and our error message, invalid name, right in our data message attribute. The last name will be very similar, except it gets a column name of last name. We'll use the same function in our form helper to check this, just like we checked the first name. Then we have our password. Copy our signup-fh class there. Data column for this is password. Data check will be password. And we're moving our input error message into our data message. And last, we have our confirm password. Add our signup-fh class and copy our data attributes over. The column here is confirm password. Data check here is also confirm password. And we'll remove our error message here, same as our password error message. And we're going to add one more data attribute here for our confirm password, matches. This is going to tell the form helper what input field to validate this input field against. Our confirm password, we need to make sure matches our password, and so we're going to copy our data column password into our data matches for our confirm password. Now our form helper will take this input field right here and make sure what the user enters matches this input field right up here for our password. Now that we know how the form helper is going to function, and we've added the correct data elements and classes to our form in the HTML, we're going to dive into the JavaScript. We're going to begin by getting our self equals this, assigning our form helper to self inside of our constructor. Then we're going to create a prefix. This will allow us to have multiple form helpers on the same page. And we're going to check for form helper class prefix in the arguments coming in and use that prefix and append on a dash. Otherwise, we're not going to use any class prefix. So if you only have one form on the page, you don't really need to add a prefix. For this episode, we're going to use one so we can see how our form helper works. So in our arguments we're passing in, our form class prefix we're going to define as signup. And over here in our form helper we're appending on a dash to it. Then we're going to define our input class identifier. Now our input class identifier is going to use our prefix if we have it, in our case signup dash, and then we're going to check for an input class identifier coming in from the arguments. If we don't have one, we're just going to default to fh. In our case, the self input class identifier will equal signup-fh. Now remember, this is what we added to each one of our input fields, our signup-fh class. And that's how we assign all the inputs we want to a specific form helper object we create. If we didn't have a prefix, it would just be fh, and then over in our HTML body, we would have just had to add fh onto the input. And the reason this is important is because if we had two forms on the page, let's say a sign up and a login, right? We'd have another login input, but for that one, we would define login-fh. Our input sign up and our input login are not being included in the same form helper because over in our signup.js file, we would create another form helper here with the prefix of login and call this login form. Now our signup form helper only contains input fields with our signup-fh class, and our login form would only target inputs with the login-fh class. The next thing we want to define is our input error class identifier. Same idea here, we want to append on our prefix in case of multiple forms on the same page. Check for that error class in our args. Otherwise, it's just going to be FHE, form helper error. I don't believe we added those identifiers to our HTML body, so let's go ahead and do that right now. We have our signup FH on our inputs, and we have our signup FHE on each of our input error messages. There's our email error, our username error, our first name error, last name error, password error, and confirm password error. What it boils down to is just adding these classes onto certain inputs that you want associated to the current form helper. If you don't want them associated with the form helper, you just don't include these classes on there and they will be ignored. With our prefix and identifier set up, we're going to go ahead and define our input error class. This will be the class applied to each input field if there's an error. Right here, we're just making it optional for you to pass it in. If you want to customize it, you would just pass in input error class right here, and then you put your error class right in here. We're just going to use the default for our form helper, which is going to be input-default-error. And we're going to define this class in our CSS, templates default styled CSS. Define our class here, and we're just going to give it a simple border of red. And with that, our input error class is all set for use. Next, we're going to define a min password length. And again here, like the input error class, we're making this optional for you to pass in if you want. Otherwise, if you don't pass it in, it's just going to default to 8. And then we can define our self.formElements object. And we're going to populate our form elements object with each element on the page that contains a class of signup-fh. Variable input elements equals document.get elements by class name. And the class name we're going to pass in here is our self.inputClassIdentifier. Now we retrieved all the elements on the page with our signup-fh class. So we're going to go ahead and loop over those. For each element on the page, we're going to create an elements object. We're going to grab our column, our check, matches, and our class name. And we're getting each of these from our input element. So input element I.get attribute, and we're going to grab that right from our data column. Then we're going to get our data check attribute, data check, and we're also going to return or false. This will allow us going forward to leave this data check attribute off of the input. Why would we want to leave it off the input? Well, in the future, we're going to have some forms where inputs are optional for the user to input, and so we're not going to want to check it. And by leaving the data attribute off of our input, we're basically saying to the form helper, pass this input along to the server and don't run any checks on it. We're going to do the same for data matches, because for a lot of the form elements, we're not matching against anything, so we're just going to leave our data-matches off of those form elements. Then we're going to create a unique class name for each of these elements on our form. We're going to grab our self-input-class-identifier plus our object.keys self.form_elements.length. We're defining a unique class name now for each of the elements on the page, and we're going to apply that class name to that element. We have our signup-fh right here, and then this is getting the length of our current form elements, so we're basically auto-incrementing with a number at the end of our signup-fh, so that it would look like signup0, then signup1, signup2, and so on for each of the elements that we're including in our form helper. This allows this form helper to have a unique identifier directly to that input. Then we're going to add that class to the input. Input elements I.ClassList.add, and we're going to say element object.class name. Then finally, inside of our for loop over each of the elements, we're going to add on that element to our form elements object. Self.formElements element object.column. We're going to key this form elements object by the column name. So our first element here would be form elements email, and then username, first name, last name, and so on. And we're going to say equals element object. Now, each of our objects on the page with our signup-fh class will be added to our form elements with a key of their column name. And that is a constructor for our form helper. We have successfully mapped our HTML elements over here on our form to our form helper right here. This is a good place to stop and check to make sure that all of this is working. And we're just going to do a console.log of our signup form right here. Now we're going to hit F12 and refresh our page. Let's zoom this in so you guys can see it a little better. And here's our object that we console logged out, our signup form helper. If we expand this, we can see everything that got set up. Here's our form class prefix, signup dash. Just like we defined, we have our input class identifier, which is our signup-fh, the thing we apply to every element on the page we want included in this form helper. We have our input error class and our input class error identifier, which is signup-fhe, the class we put on all our error message divs. And then the most important part of this form helper is the form elements. Expand this here, and it populated with everything that we specified. We have our confirm password, email, first name, last name, password, and username. Let's check out our email. We're going to expand that. This is the object we created in our for loop. We added the check, the class name, the column, and the matches. Looks like our check is set to false, which should be set to email. We messed something up there. Let's look at another element here, first name. That one got set up correctly. See check name, column first name, class name, signup-fh2, and let's just make sure that class name got applied to our element here. There's our signup-fh2, and let's look at our confirm password. That one had the matches on it, so we have matches password. Let's see what's going on with our email here. So our email did not get the check. Oh, it's because I removed it when I was telling you guys about how we could leave that check off. So in this case, if we left the check off of email, it would just be false, which means the form helper is not going to validate it. So whatever we put in that input field will be marked as valid and go to the server. So let's put our check back on there, refresh our page, check out our form elements again, and now our email should have the check. All right. our form helper object has been initialized correctly via our constructor function. Now that our form helper is set up, we need to go ahead and validate it. Over in our script.js for our signup page, we're going to pass along our signup form, which is our form helper, into our server signup function. Add it there, and then add it to our actual function as the parameter. Then we're going to write an if statement, and here we're going to create a new function .validate. If everything is valid on the front end, then we can go ahead and we can send it to the server. If it's not, we're not going to even bother sending it to the server. Over in our form helper, we need to create our validate function. And we're going to begin with our self equaling this. Then we're going to set a self.form is valid boolean. And we're going to assume that it's true. Then we're going to loop over each of our form elements. First thing we want to do when we're checking our element is get the corresponding DOM element. This is where our class name comes in right here that we defined. We're going to get the element by class name. Now we have our DOM element based off of our signup-fh01234 and so on. Now that we have our element, we need to get the value that the user has input into that input field and store it in our form elements object. So we're going to specify self.formelements key.value, and we're going to set this to the actual value that the user has input into our DOM element, which is right here, DOM element.value. Now that we have the value stored, we're going to go ahead and validate it. We're going to add another key on here called isValid, and this is telling us if the form element is valid. And then we're going to validate it here with a new function, self.validate input. And we're going to pass along the entire form element that we're currently on in our for loop. And now we get to write our form.validate input function. Validate input, and we'll call the parameter here form element. So our form element here will be our entire object for one of these form elements. So for email, we'll be passing along this object right here, and the validate function will depend on our value, which is what the user has entered into the input field. Self equals this, and here's where we're going to determine what check we need to do on the current input. And all we have to do here is write an if statement. If our form element check is an email, we're going to return is valid email. And we're going to pass along our form element .value to be assigned to what the user entered. And we'll do a .trim on the email to get rid of any trailing white spaces. So now we define our isValidEmail function. Takes in our email address that we want to validate, and we're going to do some regex here. Copy and paste the regex here for checking for email. This regex is basically just checking to make sure the email structure is valid. Then we can return our regex.test, and here we're passing in our email .to lowercase. And that's our isValidEmail function, checking the structure of the email and returning true or false if it's valid or not up here in our validate input function, which needs to be defined as a function. Did the same thing up here. This needs to be equal function. Now we just have to do an if check for all the different kind of checks we want to write. Basically every check gets its own function. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that this is working. At the very end of our validate function, we're going to do a console log of ourself. Since we only have the email being validated currently, we're just going to check out the email when we click the sign up button. Because remember, now we're doing signup.validate here whenever we click on our button sign up. So if we refresh the page, scroll down, didn't enter anything, just going to click the sign up, and it's went through the validate function. So if we expand our object form elements, our email, we should see false for valid. Is valid false. Now let's enter a valid email. Clear our console and click sign up again. Expand our object, our form elements, email, and now our isValid is true. And that's our .isValid on an input. We'll write other checks for the other types, but right now we're just going to finish off our for loop here for our validate function. After we set the isValid for each element, after we set the isValid, then we want to set the message. And the message is coming right from the DOM element, get attribute data-message. Grabbing onto whatever we have specified in our HTML body as our data message. With everything validated, we need to update our UI, displaying or hiding that error message or along with the input error class, the red border around the input. And we're going to create a new function for updating our UI. Call that update UI form element. Just like our validated input, we're going to pass along the entire form element object. Go ahead and create our function here, update UI form element. We have our form element being passed in, and we're going to begin with our variable self equals this. And just like in our for loop up here, we want to know exactly what DOM element we're working with, so we're targeting it by our class name. And then we're going to create a variable for our DOM element message. What we're trying to do here is find the input error message that corresponds to the input that is erroring out. So we're going to go up one step to the parent element, which is our section row, and loop over each of the children. Then we're going to look for the error class, and if we have the error class, we know that that is our element, and that is where we will place our error message, and that is the element we will display or hide, depending on if there's an error or not. Loop over all the children contained within our parent from our DOM element. which is the children inside of the section row, we're saying the parent of our input, loop over all those children. This is our parent, these are the children. And we're looking for the signup-FHE class in the children, which we defined right here, our self-input error class identifier. And if we find that class, we know that's where we want to put the message and display it or hide it. We're going to store that element in our DOM element message. Our DOM element message is going to equal this div right here, the corresponding input error message to the input. Then we're going to check if our form element is valid. If it's valid, we want to remove our error class from the class list. And our error class is right here, self.inputErrorClass, remove. Otherwise, if there is an issue with the form element, we're going to add it. Then we're going to check to see if we found a DOM element message, and if we have that and the form element is not valid, we need to populate this div with our message. We're going to target the .inner HTML and set that equal to our form element.message, because we already set our form element message to that data attribute up here in our for loop when we were validating it, our message right here. That should be a dash message, not an equal. The last update to do is our DOM element message. We need to show it or hide it. We're going to check to see if our form element is valid. If it's valid, we're going to do a display of none. Otherwise, it's going to be display block. And that is going to wrap up our update UI form element. We have gotten our DOM element by our form element. Got to update this to be form element.className. We'll copy paste mistake there. And we're looking for our DOM element, the error message. We're adding or removing the error class, placing that data message inside of our DOM element, and then displaying it or hiding it. Let's refresh our page and click the sign up button. And our error messages are being displayed with the error border. Since we are only validating our email currently, let's try to put in a valid email here and see if it validates. Now when we click sign up, the error message should go away along with the red border, and it does. We need to update our form is valid boolean based off the form element we just validated. If our current form element is not valid, then we need to set self.formIsValid to false. If one form element is not valid, the whole form will be marked as invalid. And we are going to return this value from our validate function. This is our boolean here for determining if the whole form is valid, which is being returned to our validate function, which happens right here on our button sign up click. If the whole form is valid, then we can go ahead and do server-side calls. If it's not valid, our update UI function here will take care of letting the user know what is invalid on the front end. And that is our validate function. The only thing we have left to do is update our validate input function to account for different checks. The next check we have is our username. We specified our data check to be username. Over here, we're going to say else if username is the check, we're going to return an isValidUsername. Create our isValidUsername function here. Parameter that's coming in is the username the user entered. And we're going to do some regex for this one. This regex here is just checking to make sure it's a number or a letter and that it's at least 4 characters long. Then again, we're going to return our test string, your name, and that's our isValidUsername function. Then we have our else if for our name. Our first and our last name will fall into this check, creating a function called isValidName. And all we're going to do here, keep it nice and simple, is check to see if there's anything entered in the input field or not. So if our name does not equal an empty string, it'll return true. If it is an empty string, it'll return false. Then we have our password check, isValidPassword, and we're going to pass in our form elements.value and our self.min password length. Create our function right here called isValidPassword. Parameters are password and min length. Then we're going to do return. If our password length is greater than or equal to 8, this will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. Then we have our else if for our confirm password. Return isValidConfirmPassword. We're going to pass along the value for the confirm password, and then we have to look up our matches data attribute that we placed on that confirm password, and our matches is password, so we're going to get our password value. Self.getFormElementValue. Then we're going to pass in the column name we want to get the value for, formElement.matches. And we also want to pass in the min password length here as well. You do have to create a form element value function here. Right under our validated input, go ahead and create a get form element value. We're going to pass in our in key. So we specified password here because the matches equals password on our confirm password element. So we're going to loop over all of our form elements. And we're going to say if our in key equals the current key, we know we found the element we're looking for. And we're going to return it. Self.formElements current key dot value. For our case right here, the key is password. We found the password, and it's going to return the value for that password element. And we can't forget to do our variable self equals this. And if we don't find it, we're just going to return an empty string. Find our isValidConfirmPassword, taking in the confirm password, then we're passing along the value from the password input, which we got with our get form element value, and then the min length. We're going to do a return, and the first thing we're going to check is to make sure the password is valid. If we have a valid password, then we can go ahead and check that password against the confirm password. And confirm password equals our password, then we will return true because the password was valid and the confirm password input matched the password input. And the last else we have will return true. Back when I was telling you about leaving off the data check element for optional fields in a form, it would fall into this else. Because the form check does not exist, we will fall into this else statement where the validate input function will always return true. And that should wrap up our form helper. We're going to hop up here to our validate function, put a console log in here, and then head back to our web page and validate that everything is working as it should. We're going to refresh our page. We're going to go ahead and click sign up, and each input field gets a border and its corresponding error message is displayed. Let's go ahead and start filling some of these in and make sure the UI works as well as the JavaScript object. We'll first check an invalid email. Click sign up. The email did not validate because we don't have the @ sign in it. Let's add an @ sign. Now the error message should go away along with the border. Our email has been validated. Then comes our username. Has to be at least 4 characters long. Let's do 3. Click sign up. The error message still hasn't gone away. Let's fill it out completely and click sign up. Error message went away because the validate function now returned true. First name and last name are simply looking for anything in the input field. Fill those out. Those should disappear. Now our confirmed password. Let's do test as our password. Shouldn't validate because it's not 8 characters long. Click sign up and the error message doesn't go away. Let's put in test for our confirmed password and make sure that they're still not valid. They match, but they're not valid. Let's do test, test. That's 8 characters long. Now those error messages should go away. They do. Our whole form has been validated. If we look down here at our object, the form is valid, Boolean is now true because all of these form elements should be marked as is valid true. The value has been assigned to the element. Email is valid true. There's our value we put in. First name, valid true, value hello. Last name is valid, value is world. Password, value is true, and the value is test test. Username, that also checks out, and the value is hello world. And that is our JavaScript frontend validation. We've written a simple form helper, which has now made it very easy for us to implement new forms on new pages, such as the login page, the user settings form page, and any other new forms we create in future episodes. All we have to do is set up our inputs with the correct class names and data attributes, and then on our page we just have to call a new form helper. Then when we want to validate it, we call our form.validate. In our next video, we're going to be creating a database, sending our front-end form data to the back-end, validating it, and inserting it into the database. And that is going to wrap up Hello World Episode 12, Sign Up Form Front-End Validation. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and let me know what you want to see coded up next. I'll catch you later.